Greetings, masters of metal. My name is TB
My name is TB Skyn, and the new Mordekaiser, yes, has finally been revealed to us. And I can't do a full what's the deal video of new Mordekaiser just yet. We can't really take a full look at him because his lore has not been released to us yet. We don't know what the story is with this guy, like what kind of thematic space he's really supposed to occupy with League of Legends beyond big with a mace and he does death and he's a warlord-ish. So that's gonna have to wait. But what we can do is do a comparative analysis of new Mordekaiser next to his old form. We can do an old versus new, which is a video series I really should be doing more of with all the reworks that we've been getting. But I suppose before we get into it, the first thing to get out of the way is that obviously new Mordekaiser is better. Like on every technical level, in terms of the quality of the character model, in terms of the quality of the animations, in terms of just like the tech level on display, obviously new Mordekaiser is better. Like, if for no other reason than he was created in 2019, and old Mordekaiser was created in, I don't know, 1972 or something, who cares? So, like, on that level, obviously new Mordekaiser is better, and a lot of the improved technology is something that you can really spot in his character animation. That is this wonderful, in fact, the opening of his gameplay preview has some wonderful smear frames going. Well, not smear frames, these are squash and stretchings of his character model, where he's about to do the overhead swing, right? And look at this. Oh, it's just lovely. And that's something that is really only possible on the newer League of Legends character models. Like, you don't really see that nearly as much on old League of Legends models because, frankly, their animation rigs, I think, just weren't really built to be able to accommodate it. And so, as a result, new Mordekaiser, in all of his movements and all of his behaviors, has a much greater sense of weight. Like, take a look at when he picks the mace back up and he stomps down. Take a look at the way his armor behaves. Right? You saw that, right? You saw the way that the weight is shifting around on him. You can see here, if you take a look at the shoulder plates, how they kind of... You can see that the torso is moving down, right? You can also see some more squashing and stretching going on here. The torso moves down, then the shoulder bits follow, and then they go all the way down. And then you can see, as they hit the bottom, the shoulder bit starts to raise up a little bit more, and then the rest of it follow. So there's much more sense of weight in his armor now in his animations, which is something that's actually really important to Mordekaiser as a character, is that he's this big, overwhelming, incredibly powerful warlord who's this unstoppable metal fortress who's just charging at you with this mace and is gonna crush you. Like, so that sense of weight that they can now communicate with his new character model is a massive improvement on the character expression in-game, because everything about him, and you can see it again here, how they're using the shoulder plates to kind of, you can see how he lands with his weight on his leg here, and then the chest comes down, and then the shoulder plates kind of settle in. And that's something that's simple and fairly basic animation principles, but it's something that works really well for his character, which the old model simply couldn't do. And on that sense, like, I want to give props to especially the Riot animators, because I haven't been able to take a full look at all his animations yet. Hopefully I'll be able to do that once I do the What's the Deal video. But he's a massive, just in terms of his physical expression, a massive improvement over old Mordekaiser, who was always kind of stiff and clunky and didn't really move in a very compelling or interesting way. You can even see it here, like his auto attack, which I quite enjoy. Like, look at that. Again, you can see the breaking, right? You can see how the mace gets bent in this arc as it flies through his opponent. And then you can see how, as it swings around, he brings up his hand, he catches it, and then you can see how he settles his weight back down again. And it gives so much more of a feeling of weight and power behind his movements. So on every possible conceivable technical level, Mordekaiser is, of course, a massive improvement on his old form. So why am I emphasizing that so much up front? Well, because technically he's a lot better. Thematically, though... So this is a little personal hang-up of mine. You might be aware of this if you watched my 5-hour live stream where I made a tier list of all the champions, or the old Mordekaiser What's the Deal video. I have always thought of Mordekaiser as kind of League of Legends Skeletor. Like, he sort of occupied that space for me. That, big, giant, sort of ridiculous fantasy, campy, evil warlord, whatever, who existed in this kind of, as like, terrifying, obviously, and scary and dangerous, but also just a little bit silly in the way that you'd get in, like, the old 80s cartoons. I could always see this version of Mordekaiser as a toy that you could buy in the 1980s from some kind of cartoon toy marketing tie-in thing, where he was the evil overlord who just, like, never seemed to be able to actually hurt any of the heroes, but who was always really, oh, I'm gonna get you next time, like that kind of character. And I've always loved that version of Mordekaiser. Like, I've always loved the idea that League of Legends could have this, like, big, campy, ridiculous, over-the-top, self-obsessed, kind of taking joy in being evil, loud, proud villain character. I've always thought that League of Legends could really do with that, especially the Shadow Isles, because the Shadow Isles are very serious. There really isn't any comedy on the Shadow. Like, you've got Thresh, and it was like this evil psychopath who tortures people, and Hecarim, who's the Shadow of War, who wants to kill all, and Callista, who's this tragic, betrayed vengeance spirit, and Yorick, who's like, all life on the Shadow Isles was destroyed, but I alone as a monk must restore it by engaging with the powers of undeath. And then you've got Maokai, who's this nature spirit who was corrupted and twisted, and like, it's all so one note. I always liked the idea of Mordekaiser as, okay, I'm the evil overlord of this place, I'm allowed to have some goddamn fun. And that was reflected in his character design. Like, he's got these giant ass pizza feet, and that's something where, like, which is one of the points of interesting comparison with the new Mordekaiser, is that he doesn't have the pizza feet anymore. That's one of the things they set out to fix, but that's also resulted in a change to his physical expression. With old Mordekaiser, because he was made, like, pre-2010, basically, part of the reason why character models in that time would have these exaggerated hands and legs is because it made it kind of easier to read them at lower resolutions and at lower polygon counts. Like, you could make a character. It's why every single character in Warcraft 3 basically looks the same way. They have these very exaggerated limbs because it allowed the animation to be expressive and readable even at very low resolutions, or even at very low graphical settings. Like, that's one of the reasons why that happens. And so a lot of Mordekaiser's character design was kind of based around this idea. He's this big, stompy character who just, like, he crushes everything underfoot, and he's got these big, giant glove hands that also makes him look kind of silly. And that's played up with just the absolute ridiculous, like, 1980s metal album cover levels of stupid spikes all over his ridiculous armor. And all of that, like, lent itself to an interpretation of Mordekaiser as campy that I've enjoyed. New Mordekaiser doesn't really have that. Like, don't get me wrong, he still looks kind of ridiculous in the sense that everything about him is kind of over the top and inflated, but he doesn't really. He looks like an over the top version of Sauron, not an over the top version of, like, Skeletor or the Overlord from the Overlord games. And that seems to be core to the reinterpretation of Mordekaiser that the character designers at Riot are working with here. Like, he has these giant spikes on his head that, yeah, they're silly, but they also look kind of menacing and terrifying. Like, they look like symbols of actual power, rather than on old Mordekaiser where they just look like, he's got literal devil horns on. Ha! That's hilarious. Here it's more like, oh, if you see that coming towards you on a battlefield, you're probably gonna die. And a lot of that also comes down to the much more clean expression of his character. And you can see how the Riot designers have tried to keep the imagery of spiky Mordekaiser going. You can see how he's got these spiky things on his thigh plates, I guess they are. And you can see how the boots, too, incorporate this, slicing. You can see there's lots of edges and there's lots of pointy bits on his armor. But unlike old Mordekaiser, who looks like he would stab himself to death, like if he tried to stretch a little bit too much, this one looks more like, okay, these things actually probably offer him some kind of protection in combat. Like, they look like they could theoretically be part of a practical armor piece if your theoretical warrior was also, able to carry approximately 4,000 pounds of metal on them. So new Mordekaiser looks menacing. He looks like, you know, the hyper powerful Sauron. Like if Sauron was a wrestler, it's kind of that's kind of the vibe I'm getting from him. He looks menacing, he looks competent, he looks dangerous, and he looks badass. And he looks kind of edgy. Like in a literal sense, he's got edges all over him. Which, yeah, I get, like, he makes much more sense visually as a character as the overlord of the Shadow Isles, like as the Dark Lord of the Shadow Isles, basically as the Dark Lord of the Undead. He makes much more sense as a serious threat to the League of Legends world in the aesthetic that they've chosen for him now. I just also feel like he looks a lot less fun. And this is something I've been sort of not necessarily complaining about so much because it is, like I said, objectively an improvement, but something I've been kind of bothered by for a while in the aesthetic direction that League of Legends has taken is that old characters like, you know, your Swain or like your old Urgot and characters like that who were always kind of campy and silly, right? Like Urgot being this giant mass of flesh on spider legs. And old Swain being this bald, hook-nosed, old, limping man who's like, who kind of looked gross and unappealing in a lot of ways, but who also looked like that kind of over-the-top that you get in a really good cartoon series for young kids, right? That's been kind of vanishing, and it's being replaced more and more with this, like, something that is hyper-competent, that is, like, interesting to look at, but which also kind of looks like, yeah, that's exactly the version of that you would expect. Like, this is the version of that I would expect to see from any of a dozen video games, from any of a dozen fantasy films, from any of a dozen, like, comic book series, or whatever. Like, this looks like a very competent execution of something that I've seen 100,000 times before, where old Mordekaiser looked like, yeah, it's not like he's original. It's not like I haven't seen this stuff before, but it looks like a very enthusiastic version of, like, it's like he doesn't just have spikes. He's got spikes on his hips. He's got spikes on his legs. He's got spikes on his feet, and he's got more spikes on his feet, and he's got spikes on his arms, and he's got spikes on his hands, and he's got spikes on his hat, and he's got spikes on his everything. Like someone, that energy of a sort of a manic, hyper enthusiastic kid with that sense of imagination and just, yeah, let's put more spikes on it. Let's like, ooh, Urgot is this big zombie bloated thing. Looks more like it came from the mentality of someone who's sketching on the back of their notebook in class, whereas new Mordekaiser looks much more like this is something that I hesitate to say designed by committee, because Riot doesn't actually design by committee. Although sometimes their designs can come out that way a little bit, Riot doesn't design by committee. They tend to have strong artistic visions at the front of their character design process. It's just that it's the vision of someone who's really, really competent, but it just doesn't feel like they have that sense of video game fun anymore. And I'm not going to sit here and talk about whether that's a good business decision or not, because frankly, that's not really my area. I'm not a marketing expert. Like, this might be the thing that's going to sell 100,000 new Mordekaiser skins on the first day, because people go, holy crap, give me some more of that. That looks badass as hell and not goofy and silly like the old one. It is a personal complaint of mine. So, you know, don't take it as an objective criticism of the quality of League of Legends as a whole, just that the aesthetic of League of Legends is moving in a different direction. And that's something that's also reflected in the way that League of Legends handles lore these days. Like, you've had this long process of League of Legends optimizing their lore to function within, like, a much more regimented, a much more strictly separated set of premises. Like, the Shadow Isles are their own region, they have their own internal mythology, they have their own, like, design aesthetic to themselves, and then Demacia and then Noxus, all of them sort of being very organized, very clean, very efficient, and much more malleable, like, much more practical, much more organized, but also lacking a little bit of that fun chaos of the early days of the, you know, the Journal of Justice, where we found out that Janna was dating one of the journalists at, like, a publication in what was it, Piltover, and there was a whole scandal about it. And that one time when, I can't remember what it was, like, all these, like, tabloid stories about the characters as celebrity rather than every single character being a legendary legend who legends around the legendary world legendarily. And yeah, I mean, I guess for me, Mordekaiser is a little bit is a encapsulation of that. He's a symbol of sort of the direction of League of Legends that has been lost, sort of the over-the-top, silly, ridiculous, campy video game-ness that has sort of been subsumed into this very cool, very slick, very well produced, hyper competent new aesthetic of League of Legends. So yeah, I do enjoy, like, something I wish would show up more in Mordekaiser's character model, by the way, is that, as we can see in the splash art, he's actually not, there's no person in there. There's not a body inside Mordekaiser's armor. His armor is essentially a bunch of floating armor that's sort of surrounding this spectral form, but he's a floating empty armor inside, which is the base concept that also is used for Hecarim, which is a nice visual coherence between them as characters. That's what happens on the Shadow Isles, is that your spirit is ripped from your body, and then if your spirit is powerful enough, then it can inhabit new forms, which on his actual character model, you can kind of see they couldn't really quite realize that he has a physical body in his character model in a way that he really does. He really doesn't in the splash art, which is a pity. Like, I've always waited for them to really, truly, fully realize the idea of an empty armor animated by an evil spirit rather than some kind of weird bluish ghost body with an armor on top of it. Which, yeah. Oh, by the way, another clever little bit. The rib cage on the armor. I really like that as an aesthetic decision, as a character design bit, to emphasize that, yes, Mordekaiser is an evil warlord in a piece of armor, so how can we show that he's undead? Oh, right, turn his armor into, load his armor up with imagery of the human skeleton. That's a really good way to get that idea across. Again, not sure it shows up so well on the character model as I would perhaps wish, where I'd say maybe they should have made his helmet a little bit more skull-shaped, or like given him a little bit more, like, more symbols of death attached to him. Like, I would have loved to see, for instance, like, if Lamb and Wolf are an embodiment of death on Runeterra, which we know that Noxus, for example, worships the wolf as a symbol of death. I would have loved to see a little bit more of that iconography incorporated there to kind of tie Mordekaiser more closely to the idea of death on Runeterra. Which is sort of like the armor could use more decoration, basically. Like, it could use more symbols, more sigils, more signs of his origin, more signs of the culture that he's embodying, or the culture that he's trying to build. The only thing I know about the Mordekaiser's lore is that in the new version of him, he's this guy who's trying to create for himself an ideal afterlife, like a kingdom of death for himself to inhabit, which... that sounds like something where he would think of, like, symbols and banners and flags and all kinds of stuff that would be associated with his particular world, his particular vision of death, which is kind of missing from his character design, and it would make the design more busy and more visually noisy. So that's a hard thing to kind of balance out. But I really would have liked to see more personality on new Mordekaiser. Like, outside of my whole, oh, he's not campy and silly enough. Outside of that, I would have liked to see more signs of personality on Mordekaiser. Like, I would have loved to see more scars on his armor, for example. Like, more signs that he spends most of his time in battle, and that he can take damage without actually being hurt, which I think having, like, a broken sword embedded into his armor, or like a big chunk of the armor that's kind of where you can see like a big axe has swung into it, but he's still moving. Or if the armor was self-regenerating, maybe it's healed up, but there's scars of his old, like, stuff that sort of indicates more of Mordekaiser's personal history would have been nice. Not really a deal breaker, it's just the kind of thing that would have been nice. Like, if you're doing the whole update thing, you could have injected more personality into him. Anyway, outside of that, like I said at the start, he's better now, but he feels a bit less fun. Anyway, once the actual full Mordekaiser lore is revealed, once I'm able to look at his character model and really get a good look at him, we'll do a full What's the Deal video for Mordekaiser in the future, breaking down his lore, breaking down all that stuff. But for the moment, if you have enjoyed this particular little video, comparison video, then you can hit the like button, hit the comment button, hit the subscribe button, do all the YouTube things that make the numbers go up so that I can get to actually keep doing this stuff for a job, because YouTube kills you. Literally and physically, YouTube will manifest an avatar on Earth which will come to your house and murder you if the numbers don't go up all the time. So please save my life and click the like button. If you want to support the channel directly, then Patreon is right there for that specific purpose. You can sign up for a subscription monthly, whatever you want. $1 would be very helpful. If you don't want to do a monthly subscription thing, I also have some tip jars down in the description. There's links to those where you can give me a one-time tip and say, hey, you made a video about Mordekaiser where you talked at length about Skeletor for some reason. Here, have $3. That was nice. You can do that. I would certainly also appreciate that. And as I say at the end of my videos, to content creators like me, $1 can be the same as 1,000 views on a video or 10,000 views on a web page. So whether it's me or whether it's someone else, like a webcomic creator, any other YouTube creator that you enjoy, if there's content creators whose work you like, please consider supporting them directly, because even $1 matters so much more than you think. Of course, if you haven't enjoyed this video, that of course is completely fine. There's a dislike button down below for that specific purpose. Although, if you click the dislike button, I've heard this is just a rumor. Like, I can't substantiate this with any evidence, but I'm gonna tell you a rumor that if you do click the dislike button, then an ancient revenant from beyond the Veil of Death will materialize somewhere in the world and begin to move towards you, slowly. And every time you click another dislike button, he gets just a little bit faster. And he won't move at more than a snail's pace at first, but click the dislike button enough and he will start running to you, and you will never, ever be able to stop him. And when he finds you, he will take your soul and plunge it into the darkest depths of hell. And I mean, it's just a rumor, I can't prove it, but someone once said that to me, I think. Maybe I misheard them, and I've just kind of been repeating it to people uncritically everywhere I go anyway, because, you know, you wouldn't want to take the risk, would you?